So Republicans just passed a bill in the House that will make it more difficult for millions of American citizens to vote. I have an article here. It says, the U.S. House of Representatives voted Thursday to pass the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, SAVE Act, a major voter suppression measure that, if it became law, could disenfranchise millions of eligible voters and badly undermine U.S. democracy. The article says, the bill appears to face long odds in the Senate, where it would need 60 votes to overcome an expected Democratic filibuster. Jamie Raskin, the congressperson from Maryland, said, in a bold new departure for the forces of voter suppression, MAGA's so-called SAVE Act will make it harder for tens of millions of eligible Americans to vote, including tens of millions of people, mostly women, who change their names after marriage. And the article talks about that. I'll get into that part in a second. Every eligible voter should be able to access the ballot box, free from legislated intimidation, trickery, or harassment. Republicans have pursued the SAVE Act under the guise of preventing non-citizens from voting, which they portray as an existential threat to the American electoral system. In fact, illegal voting by non-citizens and fraud in general is extremely rare. Molly McGrath from the ACLU says, this isn't about protecting voters or our elections. It's about politicians who want to protect themselves and pick and choose their voters, but that's not how democracy works. So here's the controversy in the bill. The bill would require everyone registering to vote or updating their registration information to present documentary proof of citizenship in person. And the reason this is controversial is because studies have shown that millions of eligible voters lack easy access to documents that prove their citizenship, like a passport or birth certificate or naturalization papers. As many as 21.3 million U.S. citizens, which is more than 9% of voters, do not have such documents readily available. And over 3.8 million people, around 2% of voters, don't have any form of proof. And this is according to recent surveys. For the sake of transparency, I am a part of these numbers. I remember when I voted last fall. At that time, all I had to prove myself, to prove my identity, was my driver's license. I didn't have my passport. I didn't have my birth certificate readily available. So if they were to ask me for anything other than my driver's license, I wasn't going to be able to vote. And obviously, I'm not the only one that doesn't have my birth certificate readily available. I'd have to go to the county clerk and request it, and it takes a couple of weeks or whatever. It's just a huge hurdle that voters would have to face. And that's voter suppression. Under this new law, this is what you'd have to bring to the ballot box to prove your identity. You'd have to bring a passport, which more than half of Americans don't have, and cost over $130, or a birth certificate with your current legal name, which nearly 70 million married women don't have. According to studies, 70 million married women in this country have their original birth certificate, which does not have their current legal name because their name was changed upon marriage. This bill would make it so that if you don't have a passport, you'd have to bring a birth certificate that shows your current legal name. Your maiden name would not work. That's what this bill says. But yeah, this is a modern day Jim Crow bill. It restricts access to the ballot box for so many millions of Americans. The article goes on to say rural voters or people with disabilities would be affected as well, because the measure requires documents to be presented in person, which also undermines mail and online registration systems and voter registration drives. Representative Morell from New York said, there's no doubt that women, military members, and people of color will be disproportionately impacted by this bill. In addition to the requirement for proof of citizenship, this act would threaten election workers with up to 5 years in prison or civil lawsuits if they register someone without the correct documents, even if that person is a citizen. So if I go register to vote and I don't have my passport and I don't have my birth certificate, which millions of Americans don't have their birth certificates because they either lost it or have stolen or whatever, the election worker would go to prison if they try to register me to vote. If I, for example, just had my driver's license, which is all I need right now in Michigan. That's how I register to vote. That's how I go to vote in person. You have to bring your ID to actually vote. The Secretary of State in Colorado, Gina Griswold, said, this is a threat to our democracy that cannot be ignored. I mean, look, are we surprised that Republicans are trying to suppress voters? No. They have a long history of doing this. there's no doubt that the population that this bill is targeting is intentional. There's no doubt. To be honest, this bill is probably not going to pass, right? It needs 60 votes in the Senate. And just because this bill probably won't pass doesn't mean we need to withhold our voices and our anger against it. Speak out against it. This bill targets minorities and women. Why do you think the Republican Party is doing that? Think about that. Why do you think the Republican Party is trying to disenfranchise women and minorities from voting? I don't know. Maybe it's because a majority of minorities vote for Democrats and a majority of women voted for Kamala in 2024, so most women are Democrats. Could it be that?